Hello, and welcome to the Laughing Tree. We are continuing our campaign prep series in advance of our new campaign Blades and Banners, which will be starting hopefully early this November. And today we're going to talk about something of vital importance. If we're going to play in a piratical game, we're going to talk about ships. So, how do we use ships? This is a really like much debated topic in especially D&D circles because there have been so many different ways of approaching ships in D&D and none of them have satisfied everyone, and that's because no solution is going to satisfy everyone. So I'm going to look at what we can use ships for and a few different systems for using ships, and then talk a little bit about kind of where I am on designing how we're going to use ships in our piratical adventures in Blades and Banners. Okay, so to start off, the first question to ask yourself is what do you want the ship to be? Because you may or may not even need ship rules depending on what you want the ship to be if your group is going to have one. Um, so the first way to do a ship that requires no rules whatsoever is in the background. The function of this ship is it's just transport, it's just setting. The descriptions and features of it are purely narrative. In a lot of ways, uh, this is pretty common on in fiction that takes place on ships. The ship is just a way to get from one place to another. It's a way to move the crew from one place to another. And that's where our adventures are going to happen. So if your adventures are mostly not going to happen at sea, but you want an island sort of based adventure, then that's may all you need to be. You don't need a bunch of rules to allow you to operate a ship battle if you're not going to have one. And if you are going to have like only one in the entire campaign, then you can probably just come up with some ad hoc rules for that encounter, and not need a whole complicated system in the same way you might approach mass battles. If there's just going to be one or two in the entire campaign, you don't necessarily need a big complicated system for that. You can just do it. You can just make something up for that session or that couple of sessions. So in this case, the descriptions, the features of the ship, they're purely narrative. They can be in the background. It's a setting, and you don't really need to worry about a system. But if you want the ship to be a little more, then there may be some systems to design. So another way to look at the ship is its home. It's the home base. Think of Firefly or Cowboy Bebop. In these cases, the actions of the ship to use the ship, we're relying on character skills. We're not relying on the ship itself. In fact, in many cases, especially in Firefly, we're operating in spite of the ship. I mean, the Serenity is very deliberately presented as kind of held together with duct tape and baling wire. Uh, and it's the skill of the crew that makes the ship work. It's Kaylee's engineering and Wash's piloting that makes the ship good, not the ship itself. So again, for this, you don't really need ship rules. What you want to look at instead, if you want the ship to still play an important role as a home, is you want to look at base rules. You want to look at things like the 5e Bastions playtest, or MCDM's Strongholds and Followers, or some similar system about bases and homes for your party, rather than a system that's specifically designed around sailing or flying or whatever in a ship. That's more what you want. And then there's the approach of this being a functional ship. In fiction, this is quite common. We can think of this in terms of maybe the Expanse with the Rocinante. Maybe to a lesser extent in Star Wars, the Millennium Falcon's got kind of some pretty strong Serenity vibes, but it's also got a lot of upgrades that Han talks about. He's installed some of his own upgrades, that sort of thing. So in this case, what we're looking for is a ship where the quality of the ship matters. The skill of the crew is still important, and the ship's mechanics are going to interact with the crew and maybe upgrade what the crew does. But the ship's mechanics are second, or are an important part. They're not entirely in the background. What the ship can do affects what the characters can do. This means we're probably going to want also a system by which we can modify or upgrade our ship as we adventure so that the ship can level up with the adventurers. And that's going to raise the question of, do you want ship combat? So, ship combat, just like the ship itself, can just be background. It can be the setting of a regular combat encounter, in which case it's description and maybe it's some hazards that might come the player's way as they do regular combat, but it doesn't need its own set of rules. However, if you want ship to ship battles to be the focus of an encounter, then the question becomes, how granular do you want it? How realistic? How much are you trying to really um, simulate the experience of combat on the high seas? And that's where our system is going to come in. So I'm going to look at three systems, kind of like I did with the faction system video. I just look at three systems that I have looked at. There are so many ship systems out there. I'm just looking at these three. So I'm not saying these three are the best. I'm saying these are the three that I have examined in detail, that I've thought about whether I want to use, and that I'm reviewing here. So there may be more. And if you've got one that you love that I'm not talking about, let me know in comments because I'd love to look at it. It may have something that I want to use. So to stick with D20, once again, Legendary Games Ultimate Kingdoms is a huge compilation of different extra systems, and one of those is for ships. And this is very granular, very detailed. It's got lots of descriptions of different size ships, ways to upgrade your ships, ship combat mechanics, information about crews and weapons and all of this stuff. And I love it, but it is too granular for the game I want to play. It's too granular for what Blades and Banners is going to be. It's too granular for the players that I have also, I think. But it's definitely too granular for what I'm trying to do. I don't need that much detail. I'm not trying to really play a sailing sim. I want swashbuckling combat. So then there's Scum and Villainy. I looked at Blades in the Dark last time, and its faction system, Scum and Villainy, has a similar thing with ships, uh, where the ship is going to reflect the goals and character of the group and their style. It's going to provide special actions and moves. It's kind of its own character, and it's an important part of crew um, creation at the beginning of your campaign. I like that, and I want to adopt that idea that the ship is an important part of our group creation in our session 0. In fact, I'm going to build my whole session 0 around the ship. I'm going to talk about that later. But like Blades in the Dark, it's highly attached to its system. And I'm not going to use this system. So while I'm definitely going to borrow from this, it's not going to be my starting point. The third one is one that Eric got really excited about in the lead up to Eberron Renewed Campaign 3. And he actually did a video where he dives into this system over on the Geek Pantheon YouTube channel. So go check that out. This is Wild Sea. I'm not going to deep dive into this system. I just want to talk about the ships. Wild Sea is an absolutely bonkers setting where the whole world has been taken over and turned into a giant forest, and people sail ships along the top of the trees, and the ships are like chainsaw powered, like they're gripping the branches to pull themselves along. It's awesome. It's so fun. Such a cool concept. But they have a really neat system for their sailing ships, though, admittedly, because of the unique nature of their setting, this is going to have to be adapted if you want to use it. But the cool thing here is that when you create your group, you also create your ship, and you get a stakes system where every player gets 3 stakes, and that they can use to buy some aspect of the ship that they want. So it doesn't have to be everyone has to agree, and nobody really wants to speak up because they don't want to stifle anybody else's creativity, which is something you totally run into in this kind of group decision making. Instead, everyone's got their own resources, and they can pool them to buy certain things, but they can also just say, I want the ship to have an observation deck. I want the ship to have a cargo crane. I want the ship to have this or that. And so you buy it. I really like this. It does run the risk that you end up with a really weird ship. That's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on your game. There are a lot of options for upgrades, so you could easily have quest rewards give the players more stakes to buy upgrades with. Stakes is an abstract concept, which means that you don't have to worry so much about how much does an upgrade cost, and some GMs will find that appealing because budgeting and managing the prices of that kind of thing can be kind of tricky. Um, One thing I'm wondering about, and I would need to read more into depth into the player's guide. If everyone gets three stakes, does that mean that the more players you have, the more powerful of a ship you have? Maybe that's fine, but that was just something that jumped into my head. I really like this. I definitely want to borrow something about this. Okay, so what do I want the ship to be like in Blades and Banner? I want a few things. I want it to like with the factions. I want a ship sheet that is a less complicated version of a player sheet. I want it to be similar. I want the same action resolution system. I want my players to be able to look at the ship's sheet and understand it, not have any doubts as to what they're doing. I don't want a new system. So I want something that's going to operate like a D20 system, like a character sheet. I want it to have some interesting choices for design and upgrades. I want it to be fun to put it together. I want it to be easy for the players to remember, so I want it to be less complex than a character sheet. Because, like the faction sheet, they probably use this more often than the faction sheet, but still less often than their character sheet. So I don't want it to have to be something where every time we pull it out, we have to learn it all over again. I want rules for both combat and journeys. I'm thinking very heavily into using Cubicle 7's Uncharted Journeys book to make the travel portion of D&D and of sailing more interesting and dynamic. So I want the ship to be a part of that. But importantly, I don't want this to slow down the action. This is a swashbuckling, piratey adventure, and I want it to stay swashbuckling and piratey. And that means we need to have sort of fast, furious action. I don't want it to slow things down. Another system I didn't mention, and some of you are probably calling out, is the Fantasy Flight Games, well, now Edge Studios, Genesis system, which has absolutely great vehicular combat rules, but it's so reliant on their very unique and excellent system that involves custom dice and new symbols and all these things that it's just not going to serve for me, except that there are some things from it that I kind of want to try and figure out how to mimic, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned that, hang on. Okay, so I've been running through this for a long time, even longer than I've been working on the faction thing, really as long as ever since we picked this campaign. I've been trying to figure out how does the ship work. And the idea, the epiphany I had while I was sitting in a waiting room, my daughter was in an appointment and I was taking notes. The epiphany I had is this: the ship is the crew's lair. So I want the ship and its actions to be like lair actions. And that's a menu of actions that the player characters can pick from in the same way that a powerful monster's lair is a menu of actions that the GM can pick from. The ship is going to require some stats because lair actions often have saves and things like that. So the ship is going to require some stats, but that's kind of the model I want. So, with that said, how is this going to work? Well, here's how I think it's going to work. I'm still working on this. I have had no chance to play test this. So, this is very much in progress, and I'll update it as we get closer. But right now, here's what I'm thinking: the ship has a set of actions, which I'll tell you about here in a second. At the top or bottom of the initiative order, I haven't decided which. At the top or bottom of the initiative order, the ship gets one free ship action. The players can pick one free ship action. So if the players want to use all of their actions doing other things on their turns, if the ship's been boarded and they've got all other things to manage, then once each round, the ship can still take an action. But the players can also use their action to take the ship's actions on their turn. And when they do that, they have the advantage of getting to add their proficiency to whatever the ship's actions is. And for a while I was thinking if they have a proper proficiency, but I think I don't want to do that because essentially what that's going to do is going to force my characters to like say, yeah, I'm proficient in cannons or siege staffs or whatever our weapons end up looking like. Or I'm proficient in the helm and I'm proficient in sails. Like there's just too many things, and most of those proficiencies are covered under the proficiency sailing sea vehicles, I guess. And so I might just say everyone in this campaign is proficient in that because it's essential to the campaign. So why require them to give up a resource? It would be like saying it would be like requiring them to give up one of their languages to take common to me for this campaign. So I don't think I'm going to worry about them having particular proficiencies. We'll see. But if the players take the action on their turn, they can add their proficiency. So that's the trade-off. You get one free, but you can give up your action to use your proficiency. Okay, so what is the ship like in terms of stats? Here's kind of where I am. And I haven't really designed a character sheet for this, but here's kind of where I am. The ship's got 4 attributes: hull, speed, maneuver, and firepower. Hull is how tough the ship is. This is an attribute, so it's going to have a modifier. Right now, I'm thinking that I'm just going to be real simple and say they can apply a +3, a +2, a +1, and a flat 0. And then things can be changed by upgrades and leveling up and that kind of thing. But it's going to start that way. Hull is about toughness. That's going to be determining how many hit points the ship has. That's going to have a function with the hit dice of the ship. When we reach 0 hit points, by the way, we're not sinking, we're disabled. So the hull is about toughness. It's fortitude, constitution for the ship. Speed is going to obviously affect how fast the ship can go when we're trying to pursue or escape, but it's also going to affect the distance traveled daily when we're on a journey. Maneuver, how maneuverable is the ship? This is going to affect the ship's AC, how hard it is to hit the ship. Likewise, all these things will be able to be modified by upgrades to the ship. And then firepower is going to be the stat that's going to be added to the ship's weapons, or maybe it determines the damage of the ship's weapons. I haven't really decided if it determines which one it is. I haven't decided if it's a stat we add to it, like with a weapon, or if it determines the ship's weapons. I haven't figured out how granular I want to get with the weapons. It's going to probably be kind of up to my players and what's interesting to them. Next, what are the actions? There are 4 ship actions, just as there are 4 ship attributes. There's hard over. We're going to roll maneuver and try to maneuver into a more advantageous position. All ahead, we're going to go as fast as we can, rolling speed to pursue or flee. Brace, we're going to roll hull in an attempt to reduce the damage from an upcoming attack. I don't know how that works yet. Maybe it's imposing disadvantage. Maybe we get to roll some dice and reduce. I haven't quite figured that one out, but I want that to be a thing because I want the 4 actions. And let fly, which is to attack using the ship's weapons by rolling firepower. So that's the basic function of it. There are some questions that I am still trying to answer. And I'd be interested in your thoughts if you have any. 1, what about the crew? Is there a crew? Do we need a crew? It's a magical ship. Does it maybe just work with a minimal crew the way that a starship would? Firefly has a crew of what? A real crew of really it's just it's really just Wash and Kaylee who do all the functional things on the ship. There's also Mal and Zoe and Jane, and eventually Simon and River, but and Book, but they don't really have a like practical running the ship function that we really see much of. It's more they're in charge. They handle stuff off the ship. Wash and Kaylee do really pretty much everything. The Rocinante's got a crew of 4 mostly. So how much crew do we really need in a world where everything is enchanted? No crew is simpler, and it solves several other problems. Like, does the crew get hurt when the ship is attacked? How do we decide what portion of the crew? Are the crew a part of the hit points of the ship, like the nameless NPC crew? Do I want nameless NPC crew? The crew is a problem that I haven't solved yet, and I'm working on it. It's an opportunity to have recurring NPCs, which is great. I love those, obviously, but also it raises a lot of questions. So I'm working on that part. Next, do all magical damages work? Like, can you attack the ship with psychic damage? And I say this because if we have another play, if you think about Ari could do massive amounts of psychic damage in Kyber shards. Could Ari attack a ship? I don't really know. I'm inclined to say no, but maybe it's like telekinesis tearing. I don't know. Working on it. Uh, if we're in the ship, and if we're in a ship fight, a battle with another ship, in what way are the PCs in danger? They should be in danger, but how do we represent that? When the ship gets hit, do they have to roll a save to see whether they also take some of the damage? Are all attacks against the ship area of effect? Does it matter what part of the ship they're in? And that brings us to the next question. What about zones in the ship? One thing I'm thinking of is there like a fore, a mid, and an aft zone in the ship. And so, depending on what zone of the ship is under attack, if you're in that zone, you make a save, maybe. Uh, Working on that, I want that to be possible. The zones thing plays into the question of called shots. Like, if we're trying to capture the ship rather than blast it into pieces, can we target the rudder? This is something that Genesis does really, really well. It has lots of options for called shots for targeting particular portions of the ship, the rudder, the propulsion, the helm, different weapon systems, different things like that. And I like that a lot. And so I want something like that, but I'm not sure how to represent it yet. And then lastly, am I going to bother with encumbrance with the ship? Like, am I going to bother with cargo? Is the capacity a function of hull? We leave it abstract till it matters? Probably I'm going to leave it abstract till it matters. Until they try to carry something truly enormous on the ship, probably not going to worry very much about that. So those are the questions that are still unanswered, but I think I've got the core of what I'm after. I like that there's only four attributes. D&D's stat blocks for ships have charisma. Uh, The ship does not have charisma. I'm sorry. I know you're all going to tell me that Serenity totally has charisma and the Millennium Falcon totally has charisma, and maybe okay, maybe you're right. But I think of that more as a function of the captain or crew rather than the ship itself. So that would be my argument in favor. So I like where I am. I'm at a sort of got a basic core to build from, but there's a lot of questions left. So there'll be an update later on as I get more into this. And when all this is done, I'll find some way of publishing the rules in some form that you can see if you want to check them out. But I'll come back with another video probably sometime in October with a semi-final version of these rules. But in the meantime, that's my update for this week and what I've been working on. Next week, I'm not sure what we're going to talk about next week. Hopefully, I'll be close to finalizing some of these rules. I guess we'll probably talk about session 0 next week because I want to build session 0 around the ship. And so maybe we'll get a ship rules update and talk about how I'm going to build session 0. Because next week's video will be very close to me running session 0 because we are about to start recording. So yes, session 0 update and ship update next week. Let me know in comments what you think about these things so far. I would love some feedback or suggestions that you might have. If you have run a nautical campaign, please let me know what you think and what system you liked a lot. I know there are a lot of them out there, but I have not covered nearly all of them. So yeah, let me know in comments. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us outside of YouTube, you can do so over on our Discord and to add all of our social media, all of which are linked down below. We'll have a new campaign video next Monday. And until then, thanks for rolling with us.